Hello, and welcome back to Listening Librarians. I'm here with Katie today to talk about some memoirs or biographies that we've listened to on audio. So, what's your first one?
Okay, so my first book is The 10 Steps to Nanette by Hannah Gadsby.
Oh, yeah.
I picked this up because she just seems delightful. But in a somewhat raw way, if you know her comedy special from Netflix. So the book itself is read by Hannah Gadsby, the author, and it's about 14 hours. So I did pick it up because I knew her name. I had watched both of her Netflix specials. I really enjoyed them. And very powerful message. So she even describes herself in the book as, I'm not a stand-up comedian, I'm a stand-up performer who is sometimes funny.
Yeah.
I did enjoy the book. If you liked her shows and know who she is, you'll probably also like the book. It's a mixture of humor, of course, with the comedy, but also very personal, sometimes tragic stories from her life. And it's really just the steps of her life, different aspects of things that got her to the point where she wrote the show Nanette that got her international audience. Mm-hmm. Which she even kind of jokes that it's called Nanette stupidly because she met someone named Nanette and thought, oh, just based on the name, this is going to be like an adorable grandma, because she called like her neighbor, who was an older woman, Nan, and then it's Nanette. So like tiny grandma, it's going to be, and she was like this mean, grumpy lady. So she named her comedy show without knowing anything else about this woman. She just called the show Nanette. And it has nothing to do with a woman named Nanette, aside from explaining why she called the show Nanette. And then, of course, that's what she has in her book title as well. So anyway, of course, there's some trigger warnings of sexual assault and the traumas that kind of go around with that. She doesn't dwell on them, but she says she's, of course, remiss. Now it was famously part of her Nanette special, talking about these things. It is included, but not necessarily at like a very high level of detail. Mm-hmm. So interspersed between the stories of her life, starting at her childhood, there's also a lot about Tasmania and Australian politics. And even though I have a history degree, I knew very little, it turns out, about Australia, and
especially Tasmania.
Yeah,
I mean, you just don't even think about that.
I know. I actually had to Google like a map of Australia and be like, where is it again? And then on top of learning about Aussie history, mm-hmm. You also pick up some art history as well, because that's what her degree is in. Right. And she is not a fan of Picasso. So if you want little tangents of her kind of complaining about Picasso, that's included as well. But it's very straightforward, honest, raw. It's really a journey that you go on with Hannah, and you can tell that it was pretty cathartic for her to write. It is sometimes meandering. She talks about right at the beginning that she has both autism and ADHD, but especially listening to it, and she just has like this adorable, cute, Australian accent, and you're just like, oh, I don't know. So it was fun, even on like the tangential little stories, and overall I really enjoyed it. And I think it's got a very powerful message when she does talk about those heavier things that happen in her life.
Yeah. I actually listened to that book, I think last year sometime. Okay. And I had only ever seen her on one of the like late night interview shows, but her delivery is always so dry.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I can just picture her with the one late night host, and she's almost like looking at him like, what's your problem? I think she was doing an impression of her mother or something. Oh, yeah. And really that dry, there's humor underneath, but what are you talking about? And I don't know, she just struck me as being very funny. And there are points in that book that are just utterly laugh out loud.
Yeah, especially when she is talking about her mother, who she describes as being funnier than her. Yeah. And really kind of helping her get her like stand-up comedy career started. Yeah. So,
but then coming to her shows and heckling her.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that's fun.
Well, what did you listen to?
Well, let's stick with some showbiz here.
Okay.
My first one is Beyond the Wand by Tom Felton.
Ooh.
So
Draco Malfoy.
Yes, if you're a Harry Potter fan, you'll know him. This one came out last year, and I wanted to jump on it right away because, I mean, I saw all the movies.
Mhm.
I read all the books. I'm probably not a diehard Potterhead, but, you know, they're formational for our generations. Multiple generations.
Yeah, no. I remember standing in line for like the last book at like midnight and everything. So yeah.
Well, in the last few movies, I went with a really close friend of mine because she and I were just like, we got to see this, and we're both grown-ups. We want to see this, but these are stories of him growing up as a young actor, starting off in commercials. I didn't realize he was in the movie Anna and the King, which was a sort of a non-musical redoing of The King and I.
Okay.
And it had Jodie Foster in it, so he's got little stories about working with Jodie Foster as a young boy. And then, of course, his Harry Potter years. He's got a lot of details from behind the scenes on the Potter sets. His grandfather actually got roped in as one of the extras, one of the teachers, because he just looked like a wizard.
Cute.
But of course, there are also lots of anecdotes about pranks and kind of getting into trouble because he wasn't a Draco in real life. He wasn't.
It's probably for the best.
Yeah, he wasn't a real snotty rich boy. He grew up working class,
mm-hmm.
but mischief maker and probably not the greatest student, but someone who's a lot of fun and sometimes a little over the line fun. Yeah. But then on top of that, he's also got all these heartwarming stories about the friendships that he made through making those movies, especially with Emma, because he, even though Draco and Hermione were always at odds.
And she gets to punch him.
I mean, he's very punchable.
That's my child's favorite scene probably in all of the movies.
He had it coming. We know it. But he and Emma Watson have become really good friends over the years. I mean, it started there, and he describes her as being kind of like, I don't want to say soulmate, because that kind of has the romantic overtones that he really kind of avoids there. But there's one little scene where he talks about the two of them as teenagers taking this walk, and the comment that she made about, being someone a little outside the norm. And for him, that comment really resonated. And so the two of them really found themselves to be kindred spirits. So that was really, really touching. There is some difficult stuff later on because, as you become famous, there's a lot of temptation. And he had his issues with drugs and alcohol, had to go to rehab. There's some powerful stories behind that as well. But coming out on the other side of it, to be able to look back and see that what was good about this life, what he learned, where he's going from there, was a really moving story, even though he was not an actor that I really followed that much. So I enjoyed it a whole lot. He does the narration.
Okay.
So you get the Draco voice in your head, but not quite. And it's only a little over 6.5 hours, so it's really easy to take in and enjoy.
Hey.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that sounds lovely. So the second memoir I read is called Heartberries, and it's by Terese Marie Mailhot. And I was really intrigued by this because it was described as a poetic memoir, and I've certainly read, and we even did a Listening Librarians of all books written as poetry, but I had never heard of a poetic memoir. So I suppose I had, but I hadn't read any. And so wanted to check it out. It's quite short because of it being written in that poetic form. So it's only 4 hours, and I finished it probably in about 2 days with between car rides. So we start with an introduction by Sherman Alexie, who is also a very famous author. And then the rest of it is her memoir itself. And so this was interesting for me. I wrote down my description of it's very much part a coming of age memoir, a letter to her ex, and catharsis / therapy kind of all rolled into one. So you can tell as you go through it that it was written in stages, almost like a diary. And so this is about Terese as she grows up on Seabird Island Indian Reservation, which is in the Pacific Northwest. It sounds like a beautiful location. But she had a really dysfunctional childhood. Her dad was a drunk who actually got murdered. And then her mom eventually moved on, but never seemed to have she never picked the right guy, we'll say. And then, so it's a little bit childhood, and then her as an adult, especially with these like letters to her ex, which is, I miss you and I love you, but I also hate you. Those kind of feelings all rolled into one. So she does just, talk about her diagnosis of PTSD and bipolar disorder. And essentially her psychiatrist suggested that she write as a way out of her trauma. And so this memoir is essentially the result. It is beautifully written, but it's also quite sad at parts, also sometimes a little unsettling. But by writing this, I think she's reconciling and reconnecting with her family. She has children, to the reservation where she grew up, and then kind of her place in the world. So, maybe not a light read that you would just, want to breeze through when you have time, but very powerful and interesting.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Now, my second one is going to be something a little different.
Okay.
Because I did try a couple of other different memoirs on audio. And I used to really get into biographies and memoirs a lot more, but I guess there's just a whole lot of them that aren't quite hitting for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a lot are trauma heavy, which can be very difficult to read. You've got to be in the right frame of mind to read them. Or it just wasn't quite what I was looking for. So my second book actually ended up being more a collection of memoir-ish personal essays.
Kind of like a David Sedaris, but less humor?
Not really humor so much.
Okay.
The author is Katherine May.
Okay.
And she writes a lot about her encounters with nature and how that is a comfort in her life,
nice.
But also it's something that really helps to ground her. Because she has a lot of experience, not just with autism, but also anxiety and burnout. And this collection, which just came out earlier this year, is called Enchantment, Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age. Okay. And so it's definitely drawing on experiences from the pandemic. But what she is saying is it's not just the pandemic, but the past decade really has kind of left us with a sense of disconnect, especially a disconnect from nature, on top of this burnout and fear and anxiety that just seems to be ramping up. And so the idea behind her essays is that what we need is enchantment.
Okay.
In our lives, which isn't so much about beauty, but about paying deliberate attention to something, especially in the natural world, but not exclusively. And that then transforms the thing you're paying attention to into something more awe-inspiring. So enchantment leading to wonder, leading to a greater appreciation of
mindfulness.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. One of the quotes that she has that I think will really hit home for a lot of people in the past couple of years is that we are the deep bone tired of people who no longer feel at home. We can see no way out of it. Which, I mean, I think a lot of people probably have felt that over the past few years. So, these are very comforting, a little bit rambly at times. It's not a coherent life journey. I mean, there are various
Yeah.
anecdotes from her life, especially with what she's doing with her son and her daily life and working and not working. She has a lot to say about attention in our social media heavy world. So there's that to consider. But just engaging with the world around us. And her essays are organized by the 4 elements, if you will, of earth, water, fire, and air.
Okay.
So you'll see some or listen to some anecdotes about, maybe her walks at the beach to engage with water. Or walking through the woods with her son for earth. It's not a very long book. It's just over 5 hours, and it's narrated by Rebecca Lee, who I've heard Katherine may do interviews, and I think Rebecca Lee has a very similar British accent, so probably from the same area. So it's got that same kind of cadence that I would think of the author actually having. Her previous book was Wintering, which is one of my favorites. It's one that I like to go back to at the beginning of winter, because it's just that kind of hunkering down, getting cozy, and being where you are and feeling all the feelings, not just the happy ones. So this is one that's good for contemplation, for getting yourself re-engaged with the natural world, or just if you need something comforting to listen to somebody else talk about, well, there's this little bit of their life, but there's this in nature, and there's this, and it all comes together somehow in a way that makes you feel more.
Oh, yeah, that sounds lovely.
Yeah, I really enjoy her books, so I think they're worth listening to.
Yeah.
So next month, what have we got coming up?
It's a mystery.
Oh,
just kidding. It's mysteries. So we will be back with you next month. Lots of choices.
Yes.
Cozy mysteries, creepy, like murder mysteries. You never know.
True crime mysteries.
True crime. Yeah. What will we pick? So we will be back next month with another Listening Librarians. And until then, happy listening, and thank you for joining us.
See you then.